Greg Thornberry, the president of King's College.
Will you pray with me? Eternal God, creator of all things, both seen and unseen, as we have seen the rain fall upon the earth this afternoon, it reminds us of the scripture that says that the rain falls upon both the just and the unjust. And while there are always the unjust with us, we thank you for the work and the witness of Herb London and the London Policy Institute. We thank you that they understand how to advise those who walk in the corridors of power, to advise us as to how we should govern our lives and the life of nations for the flourishing of the world. They are a reminder to us of the lines of that great anthem. "O beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life." We thank you for this evening, and we pray that we would be lovers of justice and of mercy and of truth. We ask a blessing upon this food now, and we pray this all in your strong and mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
I am Monica Crowley, and I am... Thank you so much. I am delighted to once again be a part of this lovely and very important evening. This is the 5th annual American Liberty Award Dinner, at which we celebrate the freedoms and the values that made this country both great and good, truly exceptional. And we also celebrate some of the most extraordinary individuals who helped make it so. I want to thank you all so much for being here tonight, because we're also celebrating the London Center for Policy Research, which I'm honored to be a part of as a senior fellow. In a few short years, the London Center has become quite a force, continuing to develop the ideas and programs that foster U.S. interests here and abroad. During this short period of time, the Center has established itself as a major setting for original conceptions of foreign policy. One particularly interesting and important example of this is the establishment of the Red Sea Gulf States Defense Condominium, which emerged from our deliberations at the London Center and morphed into what President Trump described in his Riyadh speech as the Arab NATO. The London Center goal was to think through a defense counterweight to Iranian imperial ambitions, and they did it quite successfully. The objective was also to develop a counter-terrorist force of like-minded actors, and they did that successfully as well. In addition, the Center has sponsored seminars on Capitol Hill for members of Congress and staff that explore a variety of policy options. So as you can see, in this very short period of time, 5 years, the London Center has truly become a place for the free and open exchange of foreign policy and national security ideas, and is now considered one of the most influential think tanks in Washington, D.C., and I also believe in the country. Now I am absolutely delighted to introduce our fearless leader, Dr. Herb London. And the president of the London Center for Policy Research. He is also a prolific author. I don't know how he does it, but he is the author of countless op-eds and books. His most recent book is called Leading from Behind, The Obama Doctrine and the Retreat from International Affairs. He is run for mayor of New York City as a conservative and governor of New York State as a conservative, which I think makes him worthy of the Profile and Courage Award. Herb is a pure fearless intellect, a distinguished thought leader, the consummate gentleman, a kind and generous friend, and a good and great man. Please welcome my friend, Kurt Weller.
When I hear an introduction like that, I know my father would love it and my mother would believe it. We have a distinguished playwright. We have a lieutenant governor. We have my favorite Hollywood actor. We have a CIA director. We have think tank specialists. We have 5 generals. We have several ambassadors. We have representatives from 7 countries. We have the future controller of New York City. We have a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. We have television personalities. We have the former Miss Israel, who is with us. We have the Consul General of Egypt, who I'm sorry to say, very sorry to say, is going back to Egypt after his tour of duty in the United States. As I've said to many people, my friend Ahmad Baruch has done more in his 4 years here than all of his predecessors combined. Remarkable man. Now, there are 2 honorees I did not mention. That is because they were former honorees. My friends, Midge Decter and Norman Pottle. Midge and Norman represent the cultural weather vane for America. It is so interesting that I was chatting with Henry Kissinger, and Kissinger loves to tell the story about Norman. He said, Norman attacked me from the left. Norman attacked me from the right. And then he says, I'm a moving target. But the interesting thing is that you never know how history turns. About 50 years ago, Norman published a book called Making It. It was a very controversial book, and among the first that Norman published. It was panned by the New York Review of Books, saying this is terrible. This year, the New York Review of Books has honored Making It as among the most important in the last 50 years. So history turns. You know it's going to take 50 years, but it turns. Monica Crowley is one of the great gifts that this country has. She stands tall largely because she's a person of very rare integrity. A truly, truly unique individual, one I am proud to say is a member of the London Center of Policy Research. Now, why the London Center? Well, you've already heard about Team B, led by Tony Shaffer, and our desire to create the Red Sea Gulf States Treaty Organization, which morphed into the speech that President Trump gave in Riyadh called the Arab NATO. It is our belief that this Arab NATO is essential, largely to provide some sort of counterweight to so many of the imperial ambitions of Iran. In addition, we have with us today General Ernie Ordino, who has done so much with the Kurdish state in Iraq. If there is ever an independent Kurdish state, there will be a gigantic statue with the Peshmergas standing with General Ernie Ordino, who has done so much in this regard. The London Center for Policy Research has also been leading the charge in the Congress to have the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a terrorist organization. Working with Senator Cruz, Congressman Franks, and a variety of others, we have helped to draft the legislation on this matter. In addition, the London Center has worked very hard with Christian organizations like the IDC, that is those who are fighting for the interface of Christianity in the Middle East, and the Coptic organizations that are very much concerned about the welfare of Christians in the Middle East. Those facing genocide know they have friends here at the London Center. We're going to do everything in our power to assist the Christians who are facing this kind of threat. Now a few words of a very, very different nature. I listened to President Trump's speech in Poland. And frankly, I was quite impressed. He talked about the defense of Western civilization. After the speech was given, I thought he would receive commendation from almost every quarter in the United States. But of course, I was wrong. Peter Beinart said, what are you talking about Western civilization? You mean the civilization of imperialism, of slavery, of exploitation. What kind of civilization is that? Jim Fallows wrote a very similar piece in The Atlantic, and Jeet Bahara did the same in The New Republic. It seems to me that these are arguments that are now well established in the United States. We know about the blemishes in the past, but as George Orwell once said in 1937, when there were war clouds on the horizon, we have to engage, intelligent people have to engage in the restatement of the obvious. Let me state some of the obvious for the Beinerts and the Fallows and the Baharas. The rule of law, from the Magna Carta to the Constitution, is something that was brought about through Western civilization. In our civilization, law is king. It is not based on the whim of government. It is based on the rule of law. Sure, very often is not followed in breach, but this is our principle. We believe in individual rights. The 5th and the 14th Amendment clearly suggest that due process is built into the American way of life and the Western way of life. The free markets that exist in the West, not only to the same degree in Europe, but exist in the West, they have introduced a degree of prosperity the world has never, ever experienced. Sure, it leads to inequality. But as Churchill once pointed out, you can have the equality of misery or the inequality of prosperity. I prefer the inequality of prosperity. We believe in the freedom of conscience. We believe in the freedom of conscience, where you can believe what you wish. From Roger Williams to the Quakers, there is no question that this has become a hallmark of our civilization. In 1989, there were a lot of young people. I knew most of them, and now know most of them residing here in the United States. We put together events at Tiananmen Square. One of my heroes is a man who fought with the young people in Tiananmen Square, named Dr. Liu. Dr. Liu won the Nobel Prize several years ago. He died this year, and as his wife has pointed out to me in a number of letters, not because of stomach cancer, but because he's being poisoned by the Red Chinese Army. Liu is one of my heroes because he was willing to stand up for freedom in the face of the kind of oppression that exists in China. It is not surprising when these young people were in Tiananmen Square and they had to build a tribute to the future. They did not build a facsimile of the Kremlin. They did not even build an Eiffel Tower. They built the Statue of Liberty. That Statue of Liberty provides the light of liberty that these young people crave. Western civilization should be defended because Western civilization represents the best of our culture, represents the best of who we are, represents the best of our history, represents the Judeo-Christian tradition, represents all that the West has accomplished. It is not to be forgotten, and it must be defended. And so on that score, I leave you with this tribute to Henry Kissinger. Kissinger is on film, and he and I engaged in this colloquy. I said to Henry, just say a few words about your past, your background. He said, no. I want to discuss a policy issue. The day that I was with him was the day after the speech that President Trump gave about Afghanistan. And so we will hear Henry Kissinger talking about the president's position on Afghanistan with the tape that I'd like to show now.
I am now delighted to introduce the indefatigable Eli Gold. Eli is the Senior Vice President of the London Center, who devotes his time and his expertise and his efforts to cultivating legislative activity in the Congress. He is tireless in fighting for the causes of security and truth. Please welcome Eli Gold.
I find it odd. I'm a young man here, not that young anymore, but a young man here with a yarmulke, and it occurs to me that I know more Egyptians in this room than I know Israelis. So it's kind of interesting. But I have actually the honor of introducing a friend and presenting him with the award with Shafiq Gabbard. And we're honoring him with the Policy Direction and Leadership Award. That's why foreign governments, our Congress, our administration, our Defense Department all reach out to us for guidance as to what we do. Now, why is that important? Because well, I can introduce Shafiq and I can read his bio, but nobody wants me to hear me say it. It's in the booklet, you can find it. But let me explain to you why we're presenting Shafiq Gabbard the award. Because Shafiq understands that when you have a policy organization, it's not about how many press releases, how many papers that you write that maybe people read, maybe they don't. It's the number of government officials, from ours or others, that contact us, that rely on this organization. And that is what is important to Shafiq. Shafiq, I would like to ask you to join me up here to accept your award.
Thank you very much. It's most appreciated. Herb London, Eli, thank you for that introduction. Distinguished guests, dear friends. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here tonight and to be recognized by the London Center and to be also amongst the distinguished and special honorees of tonight. If I sound a little bit jet-lagged, I apologize. I just flew 9,000 kilometers from Cairo to be here. So forgive me if I go off text. First, let me say, as an Egyptian and a Middle Easterner, Herb said I can speak for 45 minutes. So, but my dear friend Sandy Kleinman from Hollywood said, you got 9. So let me first thank my family, especially my wife Gigi, to whom I really share this recognition. She has been a partner in a complex and exciting journey, and I apologize for many of the misgivings of being away. My daughter Malak, who just graduated from Yale, and my young nephew, who also flew, and he's just blessed to be a father to a beautiful 2-month-old girl. My thanks to all my friends who are here from Egypt, from Europe, California, the United States. I owe you all. As far as I'm concerned, family, friends are the most important asset that in my life has made my life what it is. Standing here amongst you in New York brings back many memories. Let me say this. I got accepted at Wharton. I couldn't afford it. It was $11,000 back then, so you can understand how long that was. But at the same time, I came back in the 1980s as an aspiring entrepreneur, looking for an American general contractor. I spent a week in New York. I got no results, and I had a choice, either to go back to Egypt empty-handed, or basically to go to the subcontractors across the United States. And that's what I did. I went to Rensselaer, Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana, Talbot, Indiana, Appleton, Wisconsin, Des Moines, Iowa. I went to Austin, Texas. I went to Monticello, Arkansas. I put the bid together, and I went back to Egypt, and I succeeded. But that was not the cause of my happiness. My happiness was I got to know America and Americans in a big way. I found the values, I found the traditions and the culture of America, which I could relate to as an Egyptian, and I could link with what America is all about. One sad story is I flew Allegheny Airlines back then, and I lost all my luggage. But I will tell you, and this made a difference for me. The fact is, in the morning, I was negotiating business. In the evening, I was having dinner at their homes, meeting their family, getting to know them, getting to know Americans. An exposure that many people do not get to know if they just come to Washington or just come to New York. So I was blessed by understanding what America is about. And that's how I fell in love with this country. And I had firsthand experience of getting to know what America is all about. It was an extremely enriching experience. And as far as I'm concerned, it made me believe strongly in the importance of a stronger Egyptian-American relationship, a strategic relationship. If you come to Cairo, it's like coming to New York. But if you visit small cities of Egypt and get to know and sit in a home, you will understand what Egypt's all about. And that's a whole different situation. My face-to-face interaction, spending time, sharing meals, and engaging in both business and family was invaluable for me. It also created a pillar of my life. And to be honest, this is it, the lessons I learned. Leadership without understanding is an extremely dangerous prospect. Policy without direction is a slippery slope and with very dire consequences. And I've seen this, and it's important to understand that if we're going to lead, we have to understand. And if we're going to suggest a policy, we better do our homework before we do that. In my own business life, in my philanthropic work, in my foundation, even in my art collecting, I am very detailed, hands-on, and meticulous. The reason I do this is because I learn something every day. The world's changing extremely fast, and the world we live in is not the world that has been in the past. As we sit here today, in another 10, 15 years, we will not recognize the world we're living in today. And if we're not prepared for that and studying that, then we are on a slippery slope. Over about a decade ago, I asked my team, why are we successful? So we had a retreat for about 4 days, and we were looking at what are the reasons we were successful. And I'll tell you the 5 principles we came out with. First, we believe in Murphy's Law. So if anything is going to go wrong, it will go wrong. So we always have a backup plan. Second, we never assume. Never assume. We are always double-checking, always investigating, and learning from our mistakes. And there are a lot of mistakes. And if we don't learn from them, we repeat them. Third, cash is king. And profit is an opinion. And if anybody wants to discuss this with me later, I'll be happy to discuss it. Fourth, according to an Egyptian saying, we have a saying that says, as far as your quilt, spread your legs. So don't over-leverage. Finally, our very fifth is never invest your resources, whatever they may be, in something you don't understand. These principles have served me well. I want to take a moment, if I may, to congratulate my fellow honorees. I want to congratulate Bud McFarlane, a great American who has served America in various different roles. I wish him great success in his present initiatives. But I hope I am not speaking out of school. I got a message from you literally 48 hours ago. It's an important message, which I subscribe to totally. I'm a believer in the objectives of American national security interests. As a true friend, I say to America, you cannot and should not lose allies. And I say this as an example of what's happened over the last couple of weeks with Egypt, a country that I come from. In the last couple of weeks, from Washington, signals of cutting aid or freezing assets is not the right signal. I say this as a friend. And the only thing is, the aid is minuscule, doesn't really matter. What we're really talking about are strong messages of strategic interest, especially at this time. At a time when Egypt is fighting terrorism. We lost 18 policemen 2 days ago to a side bomb in Sinai, something that American soldiers have faced in Iraq. And that is why we should stand together in this. We cannot give the wrong messages. Reinforcing relations. Reinforcing relations with America's strategic allies is a key for proper policy. And I urge to remind everyone, remember, Iran and Iraq were allies of the United States. The United States should not, it's got to lead, but it should not lose allies. You got to get allies on board. And I call on the London Center to focus on that as a policy in the interest of U.S. national security. May I also congratulate Congressman Trent Franks, whom I've had the pleasure to get to know over the last few weeks. We have many common interests, And some of them, if implemented, would make a huge change in our combating radicalism and terrorism, specifically banning the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a long and standing issue with each. They're not the Christian Democrats, ladies and gentlemen. They are a very serious, dangerous organization. And all you have to do is read about it. My dear friend, whom I love very much, Carly Fiorina, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing for a number of years, as a leader, she served on the same advisory board with me, and she is a global citizen and an American who is courageous, committed, and dedicated in the worlds of both politics and business. So I congratulate you too. Last but not least, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Now, I have not met him except shook his hand, but I remember like yesterday, I was parked outside the American Embassy in Cairo. That is November 1973. And the embassy was open, not like today. Now the embassies are fortresses everywhere. In November of 1973, I just want to remind some of you, the Spanish flag was flying over the American embassy. We had no relations with the United States. It was after the 1967 war. I was there buying flowers from a flower shop just across to impress a young lady. This was before I met you, Gigi. The flower shop no longer exists. And I was getting into the car, in come Dr. Henry Kissinger's motorcade. It was his first visit to come and meet President Sadat. What followed was dramatic, and I really want to share this with you because I think it's so important, not only for us, but for our children. Dr. Kissinger would leave Washington, fly into London for breakfast, have lunch in Paris, come to Cairo for tea, and have dinner in Tel Aviv. He did this continuously, non-stop. You remember what was called the shuttle diplomacy. That is what he did. He did not relegate or delegate this to NSC staff or to State Department staff. Why did he do that? Think about it. He did not rush to judgment. He wanted to know the players. He wanted to understand what these players made them tick. What did Sadat want? What did Begin want? What did Britain want? What did the European Union want? These were critical issues that unfortunately in the days we live in today, we are speeding on the street. We're not getting to know each other, and that is very dangerous. He spent time and invested resources to know the leaders, to know their values, to know what they wanted. And he was able to create, as you all know, the disengagement agreement, which was the basis of the peace agreement that followed when President Sadat went to Israel. What Dr. Kissinger did was establish a policy and a direction which he was able to engage with leaders, getting to know the parties in detail. Rather than talking to them, he was talking, rather than talking at them, he was talking to them. He got to engage with them. The relationships were personal, and that met US policy objectives. It was not just saying, we, the United States, want to do this, but he engaged, and he spent a lot of time, and that truly was very effective. That sort of ends with the fact that I totally believe in face-to-face interaction. Knowing the other is critical for successful leadership and policy implementation. And as we move forward, we are relying on our 24/7 communication with our great phones and our laptops. Technological advancement is good, and the forthcoming era of artificial intelligence is going to challenge us all. But that's when we need more face-to-face interaction to be able to find common ground and common interest. That is why my American Foundation, East-West The Art of Dialogue, focuses on bringing young Americans to Egypt and bringing young Egyptians here. I'm very proud to see 5 of my young fellows right here sitting. In conclusion, let me say this. America would gain significantly in its policies if we get to know each other more and better. With the exception of radicalism and terrorism and such, which should be non-negotiable and eradicated via global cooperation, getting objectives of US foreign policy needs human engagement and dialogue, not scripted meetings. This can be of great value as we move deeper in the digital age with less human and more artificial intelligence. God bless you all. Thank you.
Two of my colleagues joined me in Cairo for dinner at Shafiq's home. Judy Miller and where is Janine Pirro? We had a wonderful time. But there is no better representative of Egyptian life and Egyptian culture than Shafiq. So it is an honor to be able to give him this award. And he is absolutely right. He stands for the best in the Egyptian culture. I'm going to talk a little about that later. Now I'm going to tell you about my other job. In addition to being president of the London Center for Policy Research, I also have the job of introducing Carla Fiorina. I've done it so many times that I consider this to be avocational. Now, in the way of prologue, let me tell you a little story. It's a story about another remarkable woman. Several years ago, Lady Thatcher asked me if we could have a joint meeting of scholars from the UK and scholars from the United States. I would bring them to the Weston Park in England, and she would bring her scholars to the Maryland coast. And we did this for a number of years. And it was very interesting, of course, but the most interesting part of it, from my perspective, was that in the evenings, I got to take a sabbatical with Lady T. And I can tell you, this was one remarkable woman. Tough, smart, extraordinary in every way. The American press never really understood her completely. She was someone who had the strength of character to stand up to the coal miners union, to go to war in the Falklands, to say even to the Americans, we are going to represent the British Army and Navy and do what is necessary in South America. The reason why I tell you that story about Lady Thatcher is that I've only met one other woman in my life who compares to Lady Thatcher. This is a young woman who at one point in her life was a Kelly girl. A Kelly girl. She was doing secretarial services. And she rose by dint of her extraordinary intellect, determination, to become the leader of the largest and most important technology company in the world, Hewlett Packard. She shattered that glass ceiling. And she shattered that glass ceiling so that it would never be the same again. I watched during the course of the presidential debates all of the characters who were on stage on the Republican side. And I have to tell you, I found my candidate. She was bright, articulate, remarkable. Despite all the arrows that were directed at her, she maintained her equanimity. She was really quite extraordinary. Here was my presidential candidate. I am pleased and honored to be able to say Carly Fiorina will always be my presidential candidate, and she is the awardee tonight for this London Center Award. Carly Fiorina.
I feel that I must spend the next 5 minutes correcting the record, telling you that really it's a little over the top, but thank you, Herb. Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. And I'm so honored to be here tonight, not just because Herb and his lovely wife have been such good friends of mine for so long, but also to be in the company of such wonderful awardees. Dr. Kissinger, a man that I have come to know and not just admire, but love. I mean, he's lovable, honestly. Admirable, yes, but lovable as well for all of those of you who know him. Bud McFarlane, a great patriot, Trent Franks, and a special shout out to my very, very good friend, Shafiq, his lovely wife, Gigi. I met Shafiq on an advisory board, Gigi as well. And Shafiq, you know, and Gigi also, they're people that sort of the minute you meet them, you love them. So when Shafiq says we need to spend more time getting to know each other, it's because that's what he does, and he's one of these people that you really want to know more. So thank you, Herb, for your wonderful and gracious introduction in this award this evening. You know that the title of the award that I'm being presented with tonight is Defense of American Principles. And so I thought it was worth spending some time talking about, well, what are American principles? And I will start by saying that I wasn't a politically active young person. In fact, there were many years when I didn't vote at all. You know, I wasn't one of those young people who was inspired by Ronald Reagan. I mean, I just didn't really pay much attention to politics. I spent a lot of time all around the world growing up, and spent a lot of time as I went from being a secretary to ultimately being a chief executive all around the world as well. And in the course of living that life and working my work, I learned three things, three fundamental and human things. The first is that everybody has more potential than they realize. Everyone on this planet, regardless of their circumstances, each of us is gifted in a particular way. I could tell you about people I've met in so many places in the world, whether it's California or New York or India or China or Brazil, people who, despite the, in some cases, terrible circumstances around them, were gifted and had so much more potential than they realized. I learned it over and over and over again. Each of us are gifted. All of us have more potential than we realize. That's certainly been the story of my life. And yet, all of us are not given the opportunity to realize our potential, or to understand our gifts, or to make the most of our life. But whether or not we have that opportunity, make no mistake that every human being is gifted and has more potential than they realize. And I've learned it over and over. The second thing I've learned in the course of living my life and working my work is that people who are impacted by a problem, people who experience a problem every single day, understand the problem. And they actually know what to do about the problem. I learned that because one of the reasons you get to be a CEO, having started as a secretary, is I spent a lot of time asking people about problems. And what I learned along the way is every time I asked someone about the problems that they experienced, they could tell me the answers. It's just usually nobody ever asked them. Or nobody gave them the tools or the resources or the support or the leadership they needed to solve the problems that impacted them every day, problems that they intimately understood. People who are most impacted by problems actually know what would make a difference to solve those problems. But not everyone has the chance to put that understanding of the problem to use and make a difference and solve it. The third thing I learned along the way is that if you concentrate power in too few hands for too long, the power will be abused. It doesn't matter how well-intentioned people who hold on to power are. It doesn't matter. If you concentrate power, money, decision-making for too long in too few hands, the power will be abused, the money will be wasted, and the decisions will have terrible consequences.
I would like you all to give a very warm welcome to one of the most outstanding leaders of the Reagan White House, the Reagan era, Bud McFarlane.
Talk specifically about a problem in the Middle East that I think should keep us all awake, and that is the looming nuclear arms race that is about to break on the scene between Iran and the Sunni Arab countries. And to do all this in about 10 minutes, so I'll give it a shot. Touching briefly on Europe and in Asia. In Europe, as you know, since 2008 and the financial collapse here and overseas. Centrifugal forces have been threatening the very survival of the European Union. This noble experiment of Robert Schuman and Jean Monnet 60 years ago to overcome the legacy of World War I and II and to wrap Germany into an effective collective security organization that would so bind Germany and its neighbors into a functional trading community and thereby foreclose renewed conflict or aggression at a very, very promising beginning, and indeed, over the course of 50 years, has stood the test of time until 2008. And there, we began to see exposed centrifugal forces that began to lead countries on the margins of modernity to begin to question the viability long-term of the European Union. And these were cultural differences, really, that all of us in our hearts really know about. It's why we love to travel to Scandinavian countries and equally to countries in the Mediterranean, but countries that are profoundly different in terms of productivity and also fundamental ethic of work, sacrifice, that are dramatically different. And today, after 60 years, we have in Europe conditions in which the northern countries in Scandinavia, as well as Germany and Middle Europe, are contributing a giant subsidy owing to the very different levels of productivity in the South and the Mediterranean, the work ethic, the level of corruption, the sophistication of their legal framework. All of these factors that have been rather papered over for 60 years are being exposed as threatening the coherence, the cohesion of the European Union. And there are other factors such as the nationalist resentment over time of yielding sovereignty from France or Germany or Italy to a greater authority in Brussels is a difficult pill to swallow. Schuman and Jean Monnet knew that, and yet it was worth a try to prevent another war in Europe. Well, all of that would have been sufficiently challenging for statesmen such as Adenauer, de Gaulle, Churchill. But today, when you add to those centrifugal forces the stresses expressed in massive immigration that have afflicted Europe, primarily from Syria, but also North Africa, in the past 3 or 4 years, it has put a strain on the economies of those countries, as well as the social cohesion, and has provoked nationalist sentiments that you've seen expressed here and there in elections, most recently in France, but also separately in the United Kingdom, in Germany to a lesser extent. Add to the sheer numbers of immigrants coming in and the burden that imposes upon European countries, the small percentage of those migrants, immigrants, who are jihadists, and the violence that has occurred in Nice, in Manchester, in Paris, in Brussels, and soon you have set in motion forces which really call into question the viability going forward of the European Union. I'm optimistic. I really don't sound like it, but I am. For there are individual leaders here and there of real depth and the ability to rally their own people to overcome these challenges. It will take time, and yet leadership, and this is a theme I will come back to in just a moment. In Asia, you have historic change underway in China as China enters an imperial phase of its history. For 30 years, as you all know, it has succeeded beyond imagination in the growth of its economy and the transformation of China from being agrarian, rather backward, centrally planned, primitive society to being a country that has managed its own resources well, attracted investment, and through low-cost labor, become the manufacturing capital of the world. And with it, the second leading economic power in scarcely 30 years. And it has reached a point where it is going beyond the guidance that was expressed by Deng Xiaoping, the pivotal leader that succeeded Mao Zedong, who said, "Mind your own business, don't go looking for trouble, focus on interior development." And today, that's changed. And China has adopted a policy of going out, it's called, but you see it manifested in such giant scale initiatives as the One Belt, One Road initiative. And this is a massive infrastructure project costing in the trillions of dollars, but that includes building a connection between China and Europe, China and the Middle East, China and Russia, but connections writ large. Yes, pipelines, interstate highways, telecommunications channels, but in short, connecting China to distant markets and resources that are critical to China's continued economic growth. It's not that China doesn't have vulnerabilities, it does, notably in energy. Today, if you can imagine this, China is producing or hosts the production of more automobiles than the United States. Did you know that? 24 million automobiles coming out of producers from BMW to Geely, Chinese maker, but without any fuel. Not literally no fuel, but very little oil and gas. And therefore, China does face a need to have access to secure petroleum, at least for the next 50 years, until electricity takes over as the power behind automobiles. A vulnerability. And yet, China has had the ability in central planning to fashion this One Belt, One Road initiative and the financial mechanisms to back it up, to underwrite it. Take, for example, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, a $50 billion, in the beginning, bank subscribed from Europeans, and in the beginning, including the United States. Our government decided not to participate, and I think forfeited an opportunity to remain a participant along with Europeans and China's leadership in being able to put a brake on and channel into directions in the Middle East and Europe and Russia that didn't threaten American interests, we saw fit not to do that.
Yes.
Well, dealing with China in the years ahead is a major challenge, obviously. We are seeing the opportunity there to invoke China as the dominant power influencing North Korea, and yet it isn't happening. Because we haven't yet shown in Washington the depth of understanding of what are the instruments of influence between China and North Korea that will be effective. What kind of, not concessions, but policy positions from the United States, together with Japan and South Korea, ought we be coordinating behind the scenes with China to assure that they do use their influence, which they surely have, to curtail the North Korean program. We need a lot more depth of understanding in Washington about China. I think it can come over time. We've had a lot of difficulty, as you know, in Washington in populating the government. But a pressing need, urgently, is to get the State Department populated with more experienced people of depth regarding China, its history, culture, ambitions currently, and how to influence change in their position toward North Korea. I think that can happen, but we do need to have people, depth, people at the Department of State, backing up Secretary Tillerson to begin to have a more coherent policy toward China. And that includes into this trade domain. We have seen fit to withdraw the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade undertaking of the Obama administration, which in many respects was very misguided. And yet, rather than throwing the whole baby out with the bath, there was an opportunity because we had engendered all of our allies from Malaysia to Australia, Japan, South Korea, into signing this agreement. And now, pulling the plug on that, leaving them in the lurch, it's time for the United States to get its act together and have a more coherent trade policy. It can enable us to bring together our traditional allies, which were with us throughout the TPP, and I would say bring China into it, because they are going to be a dominant player, and better to have them inside the tent coordinating than outside the tent shipping away. I believe it can be done. I believe the guy we have in charge right now, Bob Lighthizer, is an experienced trade negotiator. I think we're going to get really sound ideas, and I'm sure the President will take them to heart and give us a picture of multilateral trade in Asia. It will enable us to take and resume the position we've had for 2 generations. We have to focus on that. Or if we don't, we're going to see a condition of ever worsening risk of conflict. Why? I mentioned one reason. China doesn't have a lot of energy. Neither does Japan, or South Korea, or for that matter, any Asian country. And as a consequence, they're all competing for the same oil from the Persian Gulf. Well, that's why we see China's belligerent behavior in the South China Sea, establishing boundaries that didn't exist and really aren't legal at all, but doing it because they can see the day not far off when the competition with Japan, China, the ASEAN countries for the same Persian Gulf oil will pose the risk of conflict. Also pose the risk of what may occur in Japan, a country which by its constitution forecloses a strong military. And yet, with the rise of China and the obvious risks posed to the very survival of Japan, without any energy. We're beginning to stir ideas of Japan becoming a nuclear power, again, foreclosed by its constitution. These are challenging times, a time that requires leadership, American leadership, with ideas that can transcend these areas of disagreement, be it about energy or about China's aggression, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I'd like to turn now and ask you to think about something that never makes the headlines. It's astonishing that it hasn't in a more vivid way, and that is threats that we never experienced before in the Middle East have become quite serious and very far advanced. How many people in the room, and show of hands, please, realize that today we're very, very close to seeing a nuclear arms race in the Middle East? Now, those are people who pay attention to the London Center. That's good. But seriously, the nature of that challenge lies that we concluded 2 years ago with Iran. It was an agreement which President Obama believed could restrain the nuclear power program in Iran from becoming a nuclear weapons program, which clearly the Iranians want to do. Well, I thought that was seriously flawed, and many others did, but it is an agreement and the law of the land. So what do we do about it? Whatever you may think about it, it has stimulated among the Arab countries, Egypt, Saudi, Kuwait, the Emirates, Qatar, Jordan, a concern, a very desperate concern about what they see as Iran having nuclear weapons at the milestones that agreement allows. And so they want the same things. They want nuclear power generation, and they're entitled to that. They signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But preventing that going to the becoming weapons program is what we are facing today. Russia and China, predictably, are rushing into the area and offering to build nuclear power plants, but without anywhere near the kind of restraint that ought to be imposed to prevent fuel being diverted to become fuel for weapons. And so the United States, which is not in that political challenge at all right now, is faced with being dislodged as the dominant power of the Middle East, and to watch haplessly as the region becomes inflamed by the nuclear arms race between Iran and the Sunni Arab countries. And consider the related steps that have been taken by Russia in the Middle East in the last few years. Their intervention in Syria 3 years ago to prop up the regime of Hafez al-Assad had almost nothing to do with the welfare of the Syrian people, and everything to do with Russia getting bases, naval bases, and an Air Force base at Tartus and Memim. Those bases enable Russia to achieve several goals. Number one, Russia has always, as you know, wanted open access to the oceans of the world and has never had it. They've been blocked in getting even to the Mediterranean by the Dardanelles, and today, however, they have jumped over that problem and have established a firm anchor in Syria that is the Western anchor of a strategy to become the dominant power in the Middle East and to connect Syria, Iraq, and ultimately Iran to make it the country dominating 70% of the oil reserves in the world. Does that sound fanciful? It isn't when you look at what they have done to offer to Iran, to sell them sophisticated weapons and to help Iran with its nuclear program. In short, you are seeing a gradual movement, not in the headlines, but on the ground, that has enabled Russia to consolidate a dominant political influence throughout the Middle East and to dislodge the United States as the prevailing power of influence, going back 72 years since President Roosevelt made the agreement with Abdulaziz. Well, lots of things to think about. Fortunately, in the past 2 years, a group of people, retired 4-star officers, experienced diplomats like Dennis Ross, one or two others, have come together and to begin to focus on how can we prevent this nuclear arms race. And it can be done. And in the process, we can rebuild the nuclear power industry of the United States, which has atrophied dramatically in the last 50 years. Well, that's in our interest. It can be done. I believe that as this current administration becomes fleshed out in professionals, state, DOE, Defense Department, and so forth, the cabinet is in first-rate condition and quite conscious of the importance and the urgency of overcoming the setbacks we've experienced in the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, I've gone on too long. The theme, the only theme I've intended to impart for you this evening is the imperative of leadership. And I mean by leadership the ability for a president, a prime minister, chancellor, to be able to define a problem in all its political, economic, military dimensions. After defining the problem, define a solution that is, what are the political, economic, and military components of prevailing in the Middle East or elsewhere. And then the personal qualities to lead in the execution of the strategy. In short, define the problem, define the solution, and get on with it. Reagan did that. There are reasons for this and why we're having a difficulty for the past 15, 20 years, and predictably being able to put forward political candidates in our country that have the ability to define the problem, define the solution, and get on with it. We could have had Carly Fiorina and we'd be a lot better off today. The good news is that we do have Carly still in the running. We have allies overseas. We have Shafiq Gabbard. We have Henry Kissinger offering counsel, and Henry will be with us, I think, until eternity. I certainly hope so. But God bless the London Center. And I will finish only by telling you that the reason I'm here, the reason I care a lot about the London Center, is because it makes a difference, a big difference. Think tanks come and go. Think tanks are usually sinecures where has-beens like me go and pretend that you're still relevant. Not at the London Center. The measure of a think tank's value is the extent to which its people, its scholars, are engaged with congressional staffers, coaching young 25-year-olds who come to Washington with high hopes to know something, to know what to do, how to write a sanctions bill, to know what to do about a threat of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. The London Center spends time and effort, hour after hour. This is a do tank. It really is effective at influencing congressional staffers, Treasury Department officials, State Department, in quiet meetings off camera, and it makes a difference. I want to thank Herb and everyone who's enabled me to be here tonight. Keep supporting the London Center.
The Egyptian ambassador, as well as the Israeli Consul General Ambassador Danny Dayan. So I'm asking Danny for the ambassador to give just some greetings, and then we'll close it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I really was thinking that it's amazing that I had to come from Jerusalem to London in New York to meet friends from Erbil and Cairo. Only you can do that there. Thank you so much. And I will say that the honorees today represent liberty and freedom. And that is the values that we share with this country, with the United States of America. But freedom and liberty should be defended constantly, without a minute, a year, a month, a year being off guard. And that's the reason that this Friday, my Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, concluding now an historic visit to Latin America. He's now in Bogota, Colombia. We will arrive to New York to speak at the UN General Assembly, but most important, to meet for the third time President Donald Trump. And Prime Minister Netanyahu will come to meet President Trump to defend freedom and to defend liberty against those that conspire against it, and mainly against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu, I said it telegraphically, will raise with President Trump three issues that are in the defense of liberty. The important issue regarding Iran, the urgent issue regarding Iran, and the delicate issue regarding Iran. The important issue, I will not repeat the wise words of the general, is obviously the attempt by Iran to develop military nuclear capabilities, to attack Israel, to attack the United States, to attack Europe. I hope that we find the wisdom to prevent from our children and grandchildren to live in a world that has a nuclear axis that starts in Pyongyang and ends in Tehran. If that happens, God forbid, if the United States does not take action to fix or nix what was wrong, we will inherit to our children and grandchildren a world in which will not be very fun to live in. The urgent issue is the aggressive attempt by the Islamic Republic of Iran to create a Shiite crescent that starts in Tehran, goes through Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and to the Mediterranean. That is the most destabilizing action that you can, destabilizing reality that you can think for world peace. We are determined to prevent that. We are sorry that the United States, by leading from behind for so many years, is less capable than we would like it to be, the United States, to be helpful enough in that endeavor. And the third one, and with that I will conclude, is the delicate one, I refer to it, As we speak, as we enjoy this dinner, 100,000 missiles from Lebanon of Hezbollah, which is Iran for any practical purpose, are directed to every single point in Israel. And we want to make clear that the rules of the game have changed. The rules of the game have changed in two senses. First of all, we will not be tolerant toward any aggression by Hezbollah for Israel. And yes, we will also cease to see the country that hosts Hezbollah as a beautiful French mademoiselle that has nothing to do with the events. The country that hosts Hezbollah is responsible for what Hezbollah, I hope, will not do. And those words that those statements that I just made, that similar to them, much more eloquently, Prime Minister Netanyahu will do next Monday with President Trump, are not words of a country that is eager, is trigger happy. Are the words of a country that loves liberty, loves freedom, but has red lines to defend liberty and freedom, exactly as the United States of America. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the hour is late. I lied. I said to you that we would end at 9:30. We're not ending at 9:30. So I thank you for being so patient. There are some lies in the 24th century that you've heard. Your check is in the mail. I will love you as much tomorrow as I do tonight. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. I did not have sex with that woman. And if you like a health plan, you can keep it. The other lie is I'm here at the London Center. I'm in front of a microphone, and I'll be brief. So I apologize that it's much later than I anticipated. However, a couple of things I must say. Number one, thank you for being here tonight. The support that you provided for the London Center allows us to do the extraordinary work that we're engaged in. I also am inspired tonight because, one, I found my presidential candidate. I know who the Secretary General of the United Nations should be, Shafi Duper. I know that we have found our Secretary of State in Bud McFarlane, and I'm also convinced that Jim Woolsey should be the Secretary of Defense. So I do believe that we've accomplished a great deal, more than I anticipated. Last, let me make a policy statement. It is very interesting that in the 21st century, it is often suggested that there isn't a policy vision for America. I'm about to offer a policy vision for America that comes from an extraordinary Egyptian. 2 years ago, President Sisi, a pious Muslim, went to Al-Azhar, the theological center for the Muslim faith, and delivered an address. In this address, President Sisi said, 1.6 billion Muslims cannot kill 6.5 billion others in order to survive. He said that there is a violence within our religion that we must control. And he said as well, there should be a revolution from within. This speech, in my judgment, was comparable to 95 speeches given by Martin Luther. It was as important a speech as given in the last 50 years, and yet remarkable. How many people in this room heard the speech? Very few, very, very few. A couple of the Egyptians have raised their hands, but others have not. This speech was given scant attention in the United States. The President of the United States ignored the speech. Here is a policy prescription for the future. Think through the way in which we have to start thinking about dealing with radical Islam, the extremists in the faith. We in the West cannot make the decision for Islam. Islam must make it for itself. Well, we must recognize the fact that this kind of reformation is necessary. The survival of our civilization is very much dependent on this direction. And so I leave you with this thought. It is a challenge. I would like President Sisi to come to the Metropolitan Club next year and deliver the speech. I would like every Egyptian to hear the speech from the portals of the Egyptian radio and TV, as well as the United States. I want Americans to start to understand that the leader of Egypt has taken the initiative in addressing a fundamental problem and issue within his own faith. Tremendous courage was required to do that. Extraordinary courage. And so he, in my judgment, is to be admired. And I admire you as well for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight. Shafiq Gabor, I love this man. He's extraordinary. Anytime I can have dinner in Cairo, I want to have it with Shafiq. Carly Fiorina, she is an extraordinary woman, really quite extraordinary. And I'm fooling around when I say she is my presidential candidate. And then last, of course, Bud McFarlane, always an inspiration to all of us who work at the London Center. So God bless you for coming. God bless you for the work that you have done. God bless you for the financial support you provided. God bless America. This great time.